The connection between not only Justice Douglas and Allegheny, but also the connection between Allegheny College and other justices on the United States Supreme Court. And I'm not going to go on for I could, but I'm not going to go on for a long period of time. But I wanted to tell you that in the history of Allegheny College, I discovered, which began in 1815, nearly 200 years ago, there have been several justices who have visited Allegheny or received honorary degrees from the college, or even justices who have married one of our students. And more about that in just a minute. In the 19th century, I discovered that two justices on the Supreme Court, Henry Baldwin and later Robert Greer, received honorary degrees from the college. And Henry Baldwin, who eventually retired and settled in Meadville, served as a charter member of the Allegheny College Board of Trustees. And then in the 20th century, I learned that William Howard Taft, when he was President of the United States, he later became Chief Justice in 1920, Chief Justice of the United States, William Howard Taft made two visits to Allegheny at the beginning of the 20th century. And then in the mid to, well, basically the mid to somewhat late 20th century, three other members at various times of the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice William O. Douglas, Justice Arthur Goldberg, then retired or having left the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Warren Burger also visited Allegheny. So Douglas is not the first and the only justice to have visited Allegheny. Goldberg spoke in the 1970s at a symposium, which at the time was called Colloquy. I don't know whether any of you remember the symposium in the 1970s, which students created, called Colloquy. And in 1986, Chief Justice Burger gave the Allegheny commencement address. But I'm here to tell you a little bit, and it really will be just a little bit, about William O. Douglas. And to learn more about Douglas and his career on the Supreme Court, his creative construction of constitutional interpretation and the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment, and his connection to Allegheny too, some of you might be interested in reading the definitive biography of Douglas, which is written by a man, a political scientist by the name of Bruce Murphy. And appropriately, and we'll see this in the play tonight, the title of the biography is Wild Bill, as he was sometimes called. The man at Allegheny who taught constitutional law before me was named Alton Kidd, and the students, I know from hearing this many, many times, called him Captain Kidd. And when Captain Kidd left Allegheny about 1964, 65, I, in a sense, replaced him and began teaching at Allegheny in 1967. Alton Kidd, whom I never met and whom I did not know, Alton Kidd was a good friend of William O. Douglas, and also in this triad, a good friend of Wayne Morris, who was a Democratic senator from Oregon. And over the course of time, Alton Kidd invited both Wayne Morris, Senator Wayne Morris, and Justice Douglas to Allegheny to speak. So in 1961, which was about 6 years before I joined the faculty, Douglas came to Allegheny and spoke in Ford Chapel. This is what I discovered by going to our college archives. And he gave what was called the Sturdivant Lecture. I don't know anything about that, and I haven't heard of any Sturdivant lecture in the last several decades. He spoke in May of 1961, and his topic was democracy versus communism in Asia. I'm sorry, I can't read my writing too well. Democracy versus communism in Asia. And he spoke by way of contrast about totalitarian Red China and in the increasing democratization of India. He was a very, well, I think we'll see this in the play tonight. He was a very, eclectic person. He was interested in a lot, and much of it outdoors stuff too, a lot besides U.S. constitutional law. And about the time he was speaking, one of our students named Joan Martin, who was a major in political science, spoke to Alton Kidd and conferred with him about choosing Justice Douglas as her topic for her senior project, her senior thesis. The students now call it the comp, but it really was a senior thesis or senior project. And Alton Kidd suggested that the student, Joan Martin, who was a junior at the time, preparing her ideas for her senior project, Alton Kidd suggested that she write to Justice Douglas, whom he knew, and ask whether she could interview him. And because of this connection, which I've already described, the letter didn't just come right out of the blue, Justice Douglas agreed to have her come to Washington, and she interviewed him in, I believe, sometime during 1961, before the fall of 1961. After the interview, she continued to work on her senior project, and I guess this must have been before the end of her junior year. She asked Alton Kidd whether she could pick up Justice Douglas, who was coming to speak at Allegheny in the topic which I just mentioned, whether she could pick him up as a student driver at the Youngstown, Ohio airport, which is where we used to fly in back in the 1960s and 1970s, not anymore. So she also had the opportunity, in addition to the interview in Washington, to speak with him when they traveled together back and forth to the Youngstown airport. They continued to correspond, and I don't know all of the details, but there is quite a detailed chapter on his interpersonal relationships in this book, Wild Bill, which you might want to look at if you'd like more information. They corresponded and kept in touch. They fell in love with each other, and they were married a little bit later on. I'll get to that in just a minute or two, or a second or two. They were married in 1963. So the research on him, I often like to say in my classes, her comp topic turned into her marriage partner. And they were married, as I just said, after graduation from Allegheny. And I've copied one picture from a photo section in this book called Wild Bill, and you can see them together. They were not married for very long. I understand from the chapter in here that they were married from, I believe, something like 1963 to 1964. I do want to end by saying that Justice Douglas was one of the giants of constitutional interpretation, often pretty creative at times, and he was criticized for that, but certainly one of the giants of constitutional interpretation of the 20th century. Thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me say a few remarks about him and the Allegheny connection. And I found her senior project, which was submitted in January of 1962.